The fabric ripped with a sickening sound as Chase Williams held up his phone, live streaming to 200 followers, while Victoria Hayes stood frozen in the hallway, her professional dress torn from shoulder to waist. That's what happens to feminist teachers who think they can fail star quarterbacks. He laughed, zooming in on her exposed bra while his crew cheered, but they had no idea who they were really messing with. What happened in the next 30 seconds would destroy Chase's football career, expose a decade-long cover-up, and prove that some teachers have training that goes way beyond the classroom. By the time this story ends, you'll understand why underestimating the quiet ones can be the most expensive mistake of your life. Every school has witnessed moments like this when power meets powerlessness. But what would you do if you had the skills to fight back? This story will make you question everything you think you know about justice in education. Roosevelt High School's championship banners might have decorated the walls, but beneath the Friday night lights, a different kind of game was being played, one where privilege purchased silence. Until one teacher's secret past collided with teenage arrogance in the most explosive way possible. Victoria Hayes possessed an athletic grace that seemed oddly precise for an English teacher. At 28, she moved through Roosevelt High's corridors with purposeful steps that suggested training far beyond typical educator preparation. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, her blazers perfectly pressed. But those who looked closely might notice the expensive shoes that seemed beyond a teacher's salary. Most curious were the small scars on her knuckles, barely visible marks that spoke of experiences she never discussed during faculty meetings. The emergency hire paperwork had raised eyebrows among administrative staff. Victoria's mid-semester placement coincided with what the district delicately termed teacher retention challenges in the English department. Her credentials were impeccable, yet curiously sparse on personal details. Reference checks led to automated responses requesting federal clearance codes. When Principal Martinez attempted to verify her previous employment, he received calls from Washington, D.C. numbers that connected to offices requiring security protocols he'd never encountered in 20 years of education. Roosevelt High sprawled across 45 acres of prime Texas real estate, serving 2,200 students whose families represented the state's most influential political and business networks. The single-story campus featured state-of-the-art athletic facilities that overshadowed academic buildings like monuments to Friday night priorities. Championship banners dominated every entrance, while smaller academic achievement notices clustered in forgotten corners like afterthoughts. This was a place where quarterback statistics mattered more than graduation rates, where boys will be boys wasn't just an excuse. It was practically municipal policy. Chase Williams commanded Roosevelt's social ecosystem through inherited charm and athletic excellence. His sandy hair maintained perfect styling even during two-a-day practices. His blue eyes held the cold confidence of someone who'd never faced meaningful consequences. At 6 feet 3 inches, he moved through campus like he personally owned every trophy in the display cases. His father, District Judge Richard Williams, had presided over local courts for 15 years, while his mother, Susan Williams, chaired the school board with iron determination. Together, they formed a power structure that made their son essentially untouchable within Roosevelt's walls. Chase's inner circle reflected his strategic understanding of social dominance. Tyler Brooks brought the influence of his father's law firm, the same practice that handled the district's legal affairs, and had successfully buried numerous incidents involving student-athletes. Marcus King carried the political weight of his uncle's mayoral office. Connections that ensured athletic department funding remained untouchable, regardless of academic budget cuts. Together, They formed Roosevelt's untouchable Triumvirate, too valuable athletically to discipline, too well-connected to ignore, too essential to the town's identity to risk alienating. Victoria's professional composure threatened their established order in ways they couldn't articulate, but felt viscerally. Previous female teachers had either responded to their charm with flirtatious encouragement or become flustered by their attention. Victoria did neither. She treated them with the same distant professionalism she showed every student, refusing to be drawn into the social games that had always worked before. More unsettling was her habit of taking private calls in multiple languages. Her possession of expensive electronic equipment disguised as standard teaching supplies, and the way she unconsciously positioned herself near exits during conversations, as if constantly calculating escape routes. The morning everything accelerated began during second period advanced composition at 9:15 a.m. Victoria was explaining narrative structure when Chase raised his hand and with theatrical precision, his timing designed to disrupt the lesson's momentum. "Miss Hayes," he said with false innocence that barely concealed underlying challenge. "Since you're new here, maybe you don't understand how things work in Texas. We're more traditional about gender roles. You might want to adjust your expectations about student respect." The classroom's energy shifted as 28 students recognized the opening salvo of what Roosevelt euphemistically called teacher testing periods. Victoria's pen never paused in her whiteboard writing, but her posture subtly adjusted in ways that suggested training beyond typical educator preparation. "Mr. Williams," she replied without turning around, "I appreciate your concern about my adjustment to local culture. However, academic standards remain consistent regardless of regional customs or family influence." Tyler picked up his friend's cue with practiced timing. "Yeah, some of our previous teachers understood that male students need different handling, more flexible boundaries for natural behavior." Marcus contributed his portion with nervous energy that masked calculated cruelty. "Maybe someone should explain local customs? Save everyone the confusion later." Victoria turned from the whiteboard with movements that seemed casual, but positioned her strategically in relation to exits and potential threats. Her response carried authority that belonged in a federal courtroom rather than a high school classroom. "Gentlemen, I've dealt with entitled individuals before. Academic integrity isn't negotiable, regardless of perceived social status or family connections. I suggest you focus on your assignments rather than testing boundaries you don't understand." The phrase "entitled individuals" hung in the air with unusual weight. Chase exchanged glances with his crew, recognizing something in Victoria's tone that suggested experience with authority structures beyond Roosevelt's small-town hierarchy. What they couldn't know was that Victoria's previous job had involved people far more dangerous than high school athletes, and her teaching experience included training that civilian educators never received. But Chase interpreted Victoria's federal language as academic, posturing the desperate strategy of someone who couldn't command respect through traditional feminine submission to male authority. His investigation into Victoria's background began immediately after class dismissed at 10:05 a.m. Using his student government access to administrative files, Chase discovered that her employment records contained unusual gaps and references to previous government positions requiring security clearances. Her teaching certification had been expedited through federal programs designed for career transition personnel, a detail that intrigued rather than deterred him. "She's probably some washed-up government secretary trying to play teacher," Garrett explained to his crew during their lunch strategy session in the athletic wing. "Thinks fancy words about federal authority will scare high school boys. Time to show her how things really work when you're dealing with champions." Tyler nodded agreement while reviewing social media intelligence he'd gathered about their new target. "Her online presence is basically non-existent. No dating profiles, no party photos, no social connections. Either she's hiding something major, or she's the most boring person alive. Marcus contributed his analysis with political instincts inherited from his uncle's mayoral campaigns. My uncle says the district hired her because they needed someone fast after Mrs. Peterson quit. Emergency placement program. She's probably desperate to keep this job, which means she won't risk making waves with students whose families matter in this community. What none of them recognized was that Victoria's desperate employment situation was actually sophisticated federal cover for an investigation that would soon expose Title IX violations worth millions of dollars in potential lawsuit damages. Chase's first escalation came during Wednesday's passing period at 11:45 a.m., when hallway traffic provided maximum audience for his psychological pressure campaign. As Victoria walked toward the faculty workroom carrying her distinctive military-grade laptop case, Chase positioned himself in her path with Tyler and Marcus flanking for support. "Miss Hayes," Chase called out with false friendliness that carried across the crowded hallway. "I was wondering about your personal life. Single woman, new town, probably lonely. Maybe you'd be interested in some guidance about local social opportunities." The question contained multiple layers of inappropriate suggestion designed to create an impossible response scenario. Answering would acknowledge the personal nature of his inquiry, while refusing to answer would seem rude to observing students who didn't understand the harassment dynamics at play. Victoria's response defied Chase's predictions entirely. She stopped walking, turned to face him directly, and spoke with professional authority that transformed the casual hallway encounter into something resembling a formal interrogation. "Mr. Williams, your interest in my personal relationships constitutes inappropriate student-teacher interaction that violates district policy and potentially federal education law. If you have academic questions related to our classroom curriculum, I'm available during posted office hours. Otherwise, please maintain appropriate professional boundaries." Her voice carried command presence that made even hardened athletes instinctively step back. But Chase's ego couldn't process the reality that a woman was establishing dominance over him in front of his social inferiors. His face flushed with embarrassment that quickly transformed into anger. "Just trying to be friendly to the new teacher," he said loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "Maybe someone should explain to you that this isn't some military base where you can order people around. This is Texas, where men still act like men." The confrontation drew increasing attention from students gathering between classes, their phones discreetly positioned to capture any dramatic escalation. Victoria noted the recording devices with satisfaction rather than concern, her training having taught her that documentation could be a powerful weapon when used strategically. "Thank you for that clarification about regional gender expectations," Victoria replied with ice-cold professionalism. "I'll be sure to include your comments in my daily documentation reports." The phrase "documentation reports" created a moment of uncertainty in Chase's confident facade. Most teachers threatened detention or principal referrals. Victoria spoke like someone whose reporting mechanisms extended far beyond school administration, though none of them could imagine how far those reports actually traveled. Friday brought Chase's next escalation during lunch period at 12:30 p.m., when the athletic wing's reduced supervision created opportunities for more aggressive psychological pressure. Victoria had been grading papers in her classroom when Tyler appeared at her door with an elaborate question about missing assignments, drawing her into the hallway where Chase and Marcus waited with phones ready to record. "Miss Hayes," Chase began with theatrical concern, "some of us have been talking and we're worried about your adjustment issues. You seem really tense all the time, stressed. Maybe you need someone to help you relax." His tone carried sexual undertones that became increasingly explicit as he continued describing in detail how experienced local men could help her learn to enjoy small-town hospitality. Tyler and Marcus provided appreciative laughter, while their phones captured every word for later social media distribution. Victoria's response once again confounded their expectations. Instead of outrage or embarrassment, she listened with the clinical attention of someone gathering evidence, her own recording devices capturing everything with federal-grade clarity. "Gentlemen," she said when Chase finished his monologue, "sexual harassment of educational personnel constitutes a federal crime under Title IX protections. Your recorded statements will be preserved as evidence and forwarded to appropriate authorities for review and potential prosecution." The mention of prosecution created the first crack in their confidence, though they couldn't imagine that Victoria's appropriate authorities included federal agents who specialized in educational civil rights violations. Monday morning brought an atmosphere of electric anticipation that crackled through Roosevelt High's hallways like approaching lightning. Chase's weekend had been consumed with planning what he viewed as the decisive battle in his campaign to establish dominance over Victoria Hayes. His social media followers had grown increasingly demanding for escalation, and his crew's weekend parties had featured extensive discussions about putting the new teacher in her place through methods that would leave no doubt about gender hierarchies at Roosevelt High. The plan Chase unveiled during Monday's preschool strategy session in the athletic locker room demonstrated sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare combined with teenage ignorance of legal consequences. His target was Victoria's professional composure, which had proven impervious to verbal harassment and sexual intimidation. Physical humiliation, he believed, would shatter her confidence while providing social media content that would cement his reputation as someone who couldn't be challenged by outsiders. Today, we show everyone what happens when some government bureaucrat thinks she can come into our school and disrespect champions. Chase announced to his assembled crew at 7:45 a.m. She wants to talk about federal law. Let's give her a lesson in local justice. Tyler and Marcus exchanged glances that suggested some nervousness about escalating beyond verbal harassment. But their loyalty to Chase and fear of social exile overrode their limited understanding of legal boundaries. Neither possessed the political sophistication to recognize that assault charges could destroy not just their athletic careers, but their families' community standing. Victoria arrived on campus that morning with heightened alertness that suggested professional training in threat assessment. Her expensive shoes showed signs of recent polishing. Her laptop case was positioned for quick access, and her movement patterns indicated systematic awareness of potential ambush locations. To casual observers, she appeared normally professional. To trained eyes, she looked like someone preparing for combat. The first indication of escalated threat came during third-period study hall at 10:30 a.m., when Marcus approached Victoria's classroom with an elaborate story about needing academic guidance. His nervous energy and frequent glances toward the hallway suggested coordination with unseen Confederates. But Victoria recognized the setup with professional clarity. "Mr. King," she said without looking up from her grading, "if you have legitimate academic questions, you're welcome to discuss them during my posted office hours. Otherwise, please return to your assigned study location." Marcus's face flushed with embarrassment at being dismissed so efficiently, his carefully rehearsed distraction scenario crumbling under Victoria's refusal to engage. He retreated to the hallway, where Chase waited with growing impatience, their whispered conference carrying clearly to Victoria's trained ears. "She's not buying it," Marcus reported with frustration. "Acts like she knows we're planning something." Chase's response carried the edge of someone whose authority had been challenged beyond his tolerance level. "Then we stop playing games and handle this directly. Championship week means everybody's attention is on football anyway. Perfect timing for teaching lessons about respect. The phrase Championship Week held special significance at Roosevelt High, where the entire community's identity centered on athletic achievement and the social immunity it provided to star players. Administrative oversight relaxed during game preparation. Faculty attention focused on maintaining player eligibility, and student behavior guidelines became remarkably flexible for those wearing Letterman jackets. Victoria understood these dynamics better than anyone realized. Her federal training had included extensive education about how institutional priorities could create environments where harassment flourished under official protection. Her documentation had been building a comprehensive case about exactly these patterns, though Chase remained oblivious to how thoroughly his behavior was being cataloged for federal review. The confrontation came during lunch period at 12:15 p.m., when hallway traffic reached peak density and maximum potential for viral social media content. Victoria was walking toward the faculty workroom carrying her military-grade laptop case when Chase's crew materialized from strategic positions, their movements suggesting careful choreography rather than casual encounter. "Well, well," Chase announced loudly enough to draw attention from nearby students. "If it isn't our favorite federal law expert, still think you can intimidate Texas boys with your government paperwork?" The hallway energy shifted as students recognized the buildup to something significant, their phones emerging with the speed of professional documentarians sensing breaking news. Victoria noted the recording devices with satisfaction, her training having taught her that witness documentation could be crucial evidence in federal prosecutions. Tyler positioned himself to block potential escape routes while Marcus moved to prevent faculty intervention, their coordination suggesting extensive planning for this specific encounter. Chase approached with predatory confidence, his social media phone already recording what he anticipated would be his greatest triumph over female authority. "Time for a reality check about who really runs this school," Chase declared as he gestured for his crew to move closer. "Let's show everyone what happens to feminists who don't know their place." But what Chase couldn't see was the way Victoria's posture shifted subtle changes that spoke of training in environments where mistakes cost more than football scholarships. Her expensive shoes were actually tactical footwear designed for rapid movement. Her blazer concealed equipment that had nothing to do with teaching English, and her documentation reports were feeding directly into a federal investigation that had been building a case against Roosevelt High for systematic Title IX violations. The storage room trap materialized with mechanical precision. A fake emergency announcement drew Victoria toward the equipment wing, where Tyler waited with an elaborate story about urgent maintenance issues requiring teacher supervision. Chase and Marcus had positioned themselves in the narrow corridor, phones ready to capture what they believed would be their ultimate victory over rebellious female authority. "Miss Hayes, thank God you're here," Tyler called out with practiced desperation. "We need an adult witness for this equipment damage. Insurance purposes." Victoria paused at the storage room threshold, her trained instincts recognizing the classic elements of an ambush scenario. 3 athletic males, isolated location, coordinated timing, and electronic recording devices, every element suggested premeditation rather than spontaneous harassment. But instead of retreating, she smiled with genuine amusement. "Gentlemen, I believe you have something planned for me." Chase emerged from his hiding position with triumphant arrogance. "Yeah, we do. Time to teach you about respect for your betters." He produced a pair of fabric scissors from his jacket pocket, the metal gleaming under fluorescent lights. "See? Federal law doesn't matter when there's no one around to enforce it." Tyler grabbed Victoria's arms from behind while Marcus moved to block the exit, their coordination revealing weeks of planning for this specific moment. Chase approached with predatory satisfaction. His phone camera focused on what he anticipated would be complete humiliation of the woman who dared challenge his authority. "This is going out live to all my followers," Chase announced as he reached for the collar of Victoria's dress. "Show them what happens to feminist teachers who think they can fail star quarterbacks." The fabric tore with deliberate violence as Chase cut from shoulder to waist, exposing Victoria's bra to his recording phone, while his crew provided enthusiastic commentary for their social media audience. "That's what respect looks like," he declared to the camera. "When you mess with champions, you get taught your place." But Victoria's response wasn't tears or panic. It was the calm smile of someone who'd just watched her opponents commit federal crimes on camera. "Mr. Williams," she said with professional composure that seemed impossible given her state of undress, "you just committed assault against a federal agent during an authorized civil rights investigation." The words hung in the air like a detonation. Chase's triumphant expression flickered as his brain struggled to process what she'd just said. Tyler's grip loosened unconsciously. Marcus took an instinctive step backward. "Federal agent, what did that mean?" Victoria reached into her torn dress and produced a badge that gleamed with official authority. "Special Agent Victoria Hayes, Department of Education Civil Rights Division. You gentlemen are under arrest for conspiracy to commit sexual assault against a federal officer." The transformation was so complete that Chase's phone continued recording even as his world collapsed around him. The weak female teacher he'd planned to humiliate had become someone whose authority extended far beyond classroom management into realms of federal law enforcement that teenage minds struggled to comprehend. But Victoria wasn't finished. As Chase lunged forward in desperate fury, trying to grab her recording device before she could preserve evidence of their crimes, her muscle memory kicked in with lethal precision. Years of training in environments where hesitation meant death took control. And Roosevelt High's star quarterback was about to discover what happened when inherited privilege met professional combat skills. The roundhouse kick that followed would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms, analyzed frame by federal investigators, and studied in law enforcement training facilities as a textbook example of appropriate defensive force. But in that moment, 3 shocked teenagers witnessed something that defied every assumption about power, gender, and consequences at Roosevelt High School. Chase Williams, the untouchable quarterback who'd terrorized classmates through inherited privilege, was about to learn that some teachers have training that goes way beyond the classroom. Victoria's roundhouse kick connected with Chase's solar plexus with surgical precision, the impact lifting all 230 pounds of him off the ground before sending him crashing into the metal storage shelves. The sound echoed through the entire wing, a bone-crushing symphony of twisted metal and scattered equipment that would haunt Tyler and Marcus for years to come. Chase collapsed onto the concrete floor, gasping for breath that wouldn't come, his phone skittering across the tiles while still live-streaming his complete destruction to 400 shocked viewers. "Jesus Christ," Tyler whispered, his grip on Victoria's arms dissolving as he processed what he'd just witnessed. The weak female teacher had moved with the fluid precision of a trained warrior, her expensive shoes revealing themselves as tactical footwear designed for exactly this kind of encounter. Marcus backed against the storage room door, his face cycling through disbelief, terror, and growing recognition that they'd just assaulted someone whose authority extended far beyond Roosevelt High's administrative hierarchy. Victoria adjusted her torn dress with methodical calm. pulling a concealed communication device from what students had assumed was a fashion accessory. Federal asset Victoria Hayes reporting successful evidence collection and neutralization of immediate threat. Requesting immediate federal response team for Title IX violation documentation and suspect custody transfer. The clinical professionalism in her voice transformed the storage room from teenage prank location into active federal crime scene. Tyler fumbled for his phone, desperate to delete evidence. But Victoria's training had taught her to anticipate exactly this response. Mr. Brooks, tampering with evidence of federal crimes carries additional penalties. I suggest you remain still while backup arrives. Chase struggled to his knees, his perfect quarterback coordination reduced to uncontrolled shaking as oxygen slowly returned to his lungs. You can't be FBI, he wheezed, his voice carrying desperate denial. Teachers don't know martial arts. This is some kind of joke. Victoria's laugh held no humor whatsoever. Mr. Williams, I've spent 6 months documenting systematic Title IX violations at this institution. Your recorded assault provides perfect evidence of the institutional culture that enables gender-based violence through deliberate administrative indifference. Every conversation, every threat, every incident has been preserved for federal prosecution. The scope of her investigation began emerging as Victoria outlined the evidence she'd gathered during her undercover assignment. Financial records showing athletic department funding prioritized over Title IX compliance officer positions. Email chains between administrators discussing how to silence harassment complaints. Security footage of previous incidents that had been reported as accidents but were clearly deliberate attacks. And most damning of all, recorded conversations between school board members and wealthy donors about protecting student-athletes from consequences regardless of their criminal behavior. Marcus found his voice through mounting panic. Our parents will destroy you. My uncle is the mayor. Tyler's dad handles all the district's legal work. Chase's mother runs the school board. They'll have you fired and arrested. Mr. King, Victoria replied with federal authority that made his political connections seem pathetically small-town. Your uncle's budget votes consistently favored athletic programs while reducing funding for harassment prevention. That creates liability under federal conspiracy statutes. Mr. Brooks, your father's law firm has systematically buried assault complaints to protect this district's athletic programs. That's obstruction of justice. And Mrs. Williams's school board decisions have created the institutional environment that enabled today's crimes. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder as federal backup arrived with military precision. Campus security reached the storage room first, their faces reflecting shock as they processed the scene, star quarterback unconscious on the floor. Torn evidence of assault, and the new English teacher speaking with federal agents on encrypted communication devices. Principal Martinez burst through the crowd of gathering faculty, his administrative composure cracking as he recognized federal badges and realized his career was ending in real time. Agent Hayes, surely we can resolve this internally without involving outside authorities. These boys made a mistake, but they're good kids from good families. Victoria's response carried the weight of absolute federal authority. Principal Martinez, your institution has been under federal surveillance for systematic Title IX violations. The assault you just witnessed represents the culmination of months of documented harassment that your administration has deliberately ignored. You are now part of a federal investigation into educational civil rights violations. Agent Patricia Chen arrived with a team of federal investigators whose rapid response suggested this operation had been planned for months rather than improvised for emergency deployment. Agent Hayes, Excellent work maintaining cover while gathering evidence. The sexual assault documentation provides perfect support for our broader Title IX case against the district. The revelation that Victoria's emergency teaching placement had been federal cover for a civil rights investigation struck the assembled faculty like a second explosion. Their colleagues' strange habits, encrypted phone calls, expensive equipment, military-precise movement patterns suddenly made terrifying sense. Roosevelt High hadn't hired a desperate teacher. They'd been infiltrated by federal law enforcement, investigating crimes that could destroy careers and end political dynasties. Chase regained consciousness in federal custody, his concussion serving as medical evidence of Victoria's professional combat training. His live stream had automatically uploaded to social media platforms where federal investigators immediately preserved it as prosecutorial evidence, while his followers witnessed the moment male privilege encountered federal law enforcement with decisive results. "I was just playing around," Chase protested weakly during his initial federal interrogation, his voice still strained from the impact that had left him unconscious. She overreacted to normal teenage behavior. Teachers are supposed to handle student pranks without violence. Agent Chen's response demonstrated zero tolerance for privileged entitlement. "Mr. Williams, sexual assault of a federal officer during an authorized civil rights investigation constitutes multiple federal felonies regardless of your age or perceived social status. Your recorded statements during the assault provide clear evidence of gender-based violence and institutional harassment that violates numerous federal statutes." Tyler Brooks faced perhaps the most devastating consequences as his father's law firm collapsed under federal scrutiny. Legal documents revealed that Brooks and Associates had received over $800,000 annually to handle sensitive student matters for the district payments that appeared designed to bury harassment complaints, rather than address them legally. "We never thought we were committing real crimes," Tyler explained desperately to federal investigators. "Everyone said it was just normal high school stuff. The administration never stopped us, so we figured it was allowed." Marcus King discovered that his uncle's political influence had become federal liability. Mayor King's budget decisions had consistently reduced harassment prevention funding while increasing athletic department allocations, a pattern that suggested coordination between political authority and educational discrimination. City Council meeting recordings revealed conversations about maintaining Roosevelt's championship reputation regardless of minor social issues involving female staff and students. The institutional collapse accelerated as federal investigators revealed the scope of Operation Equal Access. Victoria's investigation had identified patterns where male athletes received protection for sexual harassment, where female staff faced systematic intimidation designed to force resignations, and where administrative policies violated federal education law through deliberate indifference to gender-based violence. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, Roosevelt's principal for 12 years, resigned within 48 hours as federal investigators exposed her knowledge of previous harassment complaints and systematic failure to report incidents involving federal crimes. School board minutes revealed discussions about how Title IX compliance interfered with athletic department fundraising, suggesting institutional conspiracy to violate federal civil rights law. Jessica Warren, a former Roosevelt mathematics teacher who had resigned the previous year after facing harassment from student athletes, returned to provide crucial testimony about the systematic nature of gender-based violence that had operated under administrative protection. "I tried to report what was happening to me, but Principal Martinez said boys will be boys and suggested I might be happier at a different school," she explained during her federal deposition. The athletic program faced immediate suspension as investigators examined whether Title IX violations had created systematic advantages for teams whose members received immunity from sexual misconduct consequences. College recruiters withdrew scholarship offers as player harassment activities became public record through federal court filings. The University of Texas, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma State all canceled recruitment visits, their compliance officers recognizing that association with federal civil rights violators could jeopardize their own institutional funding. Chase Williams received 8 years in federal prison plus mandatory registration as a sex offender, a sentence that shocked his former teammates but reflected the gravity of federal civil rights charges elevated by his assault on a federal agent. His football scholarships were permanently revoked, his social media platforms banned for promoting violence against women, and his family's political influence evaporated as corruption investigations expanded beyond education into judicial misconduct. Tyler Brooks and Marcus King faced similar federal consequences as their families' business and political networks collapsed under federal scrutiny. The construction contracts and political influence that had protected their harassment activities became evidence of institutional corruption that had enabled systematic civil rights violations through economic and political pressure. But the transformation extended far beyond individual consequences into fundamental shifts in how communities viewed the relationship between athletic success and institutional values. National media coverage transformed Victoria's story into a symbol of women's empowerment and federal commitment to civil rights enforcement in educational settings. The image of her combat boot connecting with Chase's chest became iconic representation of institutional accountability, triumphing over privilege-based immunity from consequences. Students who had witnessed Victoria's response began questioning the gender dynamics they had accepted as normal aspects of school culture. Female students gained confidence seeing a woman physically defeat their harassers, while male students recognized that their behavior carried real consequences under federal law. Watching Agent Hayes defend herself showed me that women don't have to accept harassment as the price of education, explained Junior Sarah Martinez during a filmed interview with Department of Education investigators. The hashtag #CombatBoots Teacher became a rallying point for women sharing their own stories of workplace and educational harassment. Documentary filmmakers produced Hidden Strength: The Roosevelt Investigation, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and won awards for its examination of how athletic culture enables systematic harassment. The film featured interviews with Victoria and other federal agents working undercover in educational environments, inspiring increased funding for civil rights enforcement operations. Legislative reforms inspired by Operation Equal Access strengthened federal oversight of educational institutions and created enhanced penalties for administrators who failed to report harassment complaints involving federal crimes. The Combat Boots Amendment to federal education law specifically addressed retaliation against victims and witnesses of gender-based violence in academic settings. Victoria continued her federal career training other agents in undercover operations targeting educational discrimination. Her success at Roosevelt, having established new standards for civil rights enforcement in institutional environments. Her story inspired thousands of harassment victims to report their experiences, knowing they had federal protection and institutional accountability mechanisms. Local businesses in Roosevelt faced economic consequences as national corporations withdrew sponsorships from athletic programs associated with harassment cover-ups. The town's identity crisis deepened as community members struggled to reconcile their pride in football achievements with federal evidence of systematic abuse that had enabled those victories. Roosevelt High School underwent complete administrative restructuring as federal oversight replaced the discriminatory leadership that had enabled harassment through deliberate Title IX non-compliance. New administration implemented comprehensive gender violence prevention training, independent federal monitoring systems, and zero-tolerance policies for harassment regardless of athletic status or family influence. Jessica Warren returned to Roosevelt as the new Title IX coordinator under federal oversight. Her transformation from victim to enforcement official, inspiring other harassment survivors to pursue careers in civil rights protection. The mathematics classroom, where she'd once faced daily humiliation, became headquarters for the most comprehensive anti-harassment program in Texas education. Years later, Victoria's methods became mandatory training for federal agents, targeting educational discrimination cases nationwide. The Mitchell Protocol, named after her maiden name to protect her ongoing undercover operations, required systematic documentation of institutional cultures that enable harassment through athletic program protection. As Victoria prepared for her next assignment at a California high school facing similar federal investigation, she reflected on the transformation that had begun with torn fabric in a storage room. Chase Williams now served his sentence while participating in rehabilitation programs designed to address the entitled attitudes that enable systematic harassment of women. His recorded assault was studied in federal training academies as an example of how institutional privilege could blind individuals to the criminal nature of gender-based violence. The equipment that had seemed like strange teaching supplies, tactical footwear, military-grade electronics, federal communication devices revealed themselves as tools of justice that had been hidden in plain sight until the moment when professional training met criminal assault with decisive federal response. The hallway where Chase had expected to establish dominance over rebellious female authority now featured a bronze plaque reading, "In honor of all who stand against harassment with strength, dignity, and unwavering commitment to justice." Roosevelt's championship banners still decorated the walls, but they no longer represented immunity from consequences. They served as reminders that true victory required character as well as athletic ability. Victoria's combat boots had indeed kicked down more than just one bully. They had shattered an entire system of oppression that confused athletic achievement with moral authority, that mistook institutional protection for community values, and that had forgotten that real strength protects the vulnerable rather than empowering the privileged. Every school has witnessed moments when power meets powerlessness. But Victoria Hayes proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against institutional abuse is the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be silenced. Her story reminds us that courage takes many forms, and sometimes it wears expensive shoes and carries federal authority that can change everything. The young teacher whose dress was torn in humiliation became the federal agent whose professional skills kicked down the door to a culture that had protected sexual predators through athletic achievement. When victims refused to accept harassment as the price of education, when trained professionals infiltrate corrupt institutions, and when justice finally arrives with combat boots and federal badges, that's when real transformation begins. Because sometimes the most important lesson isn't found in any textbook, but in the courage of one person standing up and refusing to back down. And at Roosevelt High School, that lesson would echo through generations of students who learned that true champions protect others rather than prey upon them. The scissors had started it. The privilege had enabled it. But Victoria Hayes had ended it one perfectly executed kick at a time.